so much you may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time.
Welcome to Is It Bad for the Economy, the podcast where we interrogate Trump's economic policies to figure out if they're helping, hurting, or just a load of hot air. My name is Kobi Tirey, and I'm a Democratic political consultant trying to figure out how the Democrats can once again make us the country of economic mobility and prosperity. And joining me is my co-host, Banker Bill. Banker Bill is an experienced GSIB banker with all the proper academic qualifications and independent voting records to prove it. But most importantly, the only thing he loves more than money is calling BS, so if I'm lucky, I'll get him to call BS on Trump instead of me. Last time, we talked to you shortly after Liberation Day, and less than 24 hours after the episode dropped, the walkback started. But has the damage already been done? Fed Chair Jerome Powell seems to think it might be, so Trump's opening up a new front in the war on trade, and this time it's domestic. But first, before we get into all of that, Banker Bill, I want to ask, how stupid am I for not buying the dip?
Oh, from when? When everything sold off?
Yeah.
When they announced it? When it was in place for 13 hours and they called it all back? Let's run it back. The second we have Liberation Day, they bring everybody out on the lawn. We have the stationery and the boards of, saying 90-odd% tariffs on whomever. We're liberated. Everybody's actually laughing. It's going to be great. And, we all kind of bed down for the night. As that's happening, fast forward now, 7 days later, I guess it was the 8th, right? The night of the 8th when the tariffs are going to effect at midnight, April 9th. The Japanese, the Hong Kong, Australian markets, the Far Eastern markets, they open up. And at the open, U.S. futures start selling off. U.S. treasuries, right, bonds, they start selling off as in the interest rates going up. And U.S. dollar starts to weaken. So what you're seeing is broad-based selling of anything related to the United States. Any U.S. dollar denominated asset is selling off. That's overnight into Tuesday. Okay, so now that tariffs have been on, it's the morning, tariffs are on 8-10 hours, whatever it is. Well, lo and behold, there are 2 treasury auctions on this day. Okay, the same day that now the market in the U.S. is starting to sell off. Long story short, what that is, they put the tariffs on, the market's selling off, and you got these treasury auctions the same day. And interestingly, they put all this on, even though Besant and Lutnick have experience in international finance, experience in treasury auctions, and they're putting this all on that day, right? The auctions could have been set. They could have put the tariffs on a week later. They could have put them on a month earlier, whatever it was. For whatever reason, they picked it to be that day. I'm not going to say that they had an oversight. But the point I'm getting at is they put the tariffs in place. The auctions start at 12, 12:30, whatever it is. By 1:30 in the afternoon, they pull the tariffs back. The auctions went well. I think what happened was sometime overnight, someone got a call, and I don't think it was a threat, but there was obvious, wishy-washiness, fear, uncertainty in the markets. And I think important people got a call that said, if these tariffs are going to stay in place, these auctions are not going to go well. And there was, effectively some kind of quid pro quo where, hey, the auctions are going to go well. You're going to get your bid, but the tariffs better come off. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, that all played out the way it did. How could you have bought it, right? You're working. Unless you had some limit orders set up or you're looking at your portfolio day to day, hour to hour, where was your opportunity, right? I mean, are you stupid? I'm not going to call you stupid.
Well, I certainly appreciate you exonerating me and all that. But Trump, of course, is blaming it on a new target, and that's Chair of the Fed, Jerome Powell.
We knew this was going to happen. We knew there had to be a new boogeyman. We're almost 100 days in. We're going to leave Joe Biden behind. The new boogeyman is going to be Powell.
Well, I was about to say that you could be mistaken for thinking that the chair of the Fed is the end villain, the ultimate boss of the swamp of the deep state. There is no institution that folks in the anti-government crowd loathe more than the Fed. But for Trump to treat this guy like the Antichrist is a little bit ridiculous. He originally nominated Powell. But before we get into Powell specifically, I just want to ask you, how much power does the chair of the Fed really have here?
I mean, there's some that believe the chairman of the Federal Reserve is the most powerful person in the world because they have incredible trust and belief of the market. The Fed effectively sets what's called the risk-free rate. So the Federal Reserve through its Federal Open Markets Committee, for which Jerome Powell is the chairman, sets the interest rate on a daily basis from which banks lend to each other. This rate informs the interest rates globally, worldwide. That is one of the benefits of having the global reserve currency that we do. So the Federal Reserve can affect much more immediate change over, let's say, 1-year interest rates than they can over a 30-year interest rate. In those kind of situations, the market tends to have more say. Now, the Fed chair from time to time, he can exhibit, or she, because you had Yellen was the first female Fed chair, can exhibit massive influence over the market by way of messaging. And in the post-financial crisis era, the Federal Reserve has become more transparent with its information. They are going to be telling you in advance that they're cutting rates. They issue these dot plots that say anonymously, here's how the various voters on the committee see medium-term to long-term interest rates, right? Or unemployment, these different things. So the Federal Reserve chair is an incredibly important person for global monetary policy, but at the same time is only one vote on the Federal Open Markets Committee, the FOMC.
Trump wants to do 4 things right now. He wants to lower the price of oil. He wants to close the trade deficit. He wants to weaken the dollar, and he wants to lower interest rates. The first 3 of those are the result of complex market factors. We'll see how much Trump can do in a positive direction on those things. But the interest rates, in a large extent, there is one person or one group of people who are making that decision. But to what extent is the Fed chair and his colleagues just a human calculator who's doing what the numbers tell him to do and just reading out of a playbook? Or to what extent is he actually making real judgment calls and making unique decisions that could impact the economy, not just for us, but for the whole world?
I don't think it's playbook at all. I think this is all art and feel, whether good or bad. There's broad disagreement, wide opinions on this. Look, the Federal Reserve, they have a mandate set by Congress. That mandate, it's not quantitative, but we interpret it quantitatively. So they have a dual mandate. The mandate is maximum employment and stable prices. That is the mandate that Congress bestows upon the Federal Reserve. Quantitatively, we've come to interpret that as maximum employment is around 5%. Stable prices mean inflation of about 2% per year over the long term. Why do you want to have inflation every year? Look, long story short, it's the price you pay for having the global reserve status, right? There's trade-offs to it. And if the world economy is going to continue to grow, the reserve currency, the dollar in this case, must grow too with global economy. So they are constantly trying to match policy with their mandate. And the mandate is a local mandate, right? They only have a mandate for the United States. They're not supposed to be looking beyond the United States. They're not supposed to be taking into account the political ramifications of the time. They're supposed to be only striving to achieve their mandate at all times, which is maximum employment and low, or what they say are stable prices, so low inflation.
So if the Fed chair, if the Fed board is making really hard decisions in real time using a lot of independent analysis and not just sort of reading from an algorithm, what do you think the job Powell's doing?
Look, I wouldn't say hit or miss, but it's been a mixed bag, right? I mean, who would have saw the pandemic coming? Right? That, they had to navigate through that. We were coming off a period of very low interest rates at that time, and interest rates were actually rising in advance of the pandemic, due in large part because of economic growth. So that was actually a good thing to be coming off the bottom. We had the SVB crisis, the Silicon Valley Bank stuff. I don't even know if I would call it a crisis, but the Federal Reserve and the FDIC buttoned that up in like 3 days. Right. So, that was a pretty good outcome. It appears that in the industry on Wall Street and including in the local community and commercial banks nationwide, he gets pretty high marks. And it seems the Federal Reserve overall is getting pretty high marks. And I think it's mostly because of their transparency. I think you can disagree with the policy choices that they make. They each Federal Reserve president, governor, et cetera, they have their own offices. They do their own analyses. They come in, they vote. And that's kind of how it goes down when they vote on the rate. Basically, in the United States, they all vote unanimously. It's not like there's often a lot of dissent, and some people quibble about that. But he's steered the ship. Let's leave it at that.
When we talk about Supreme Court justices, we kind of have this sense of whether they're liberal or conservative in a basic understanding of what that means legally. Is there like a similar type of ranking with Fed chairs? Is he like considered a liberal or a conservative Fed chair?
There's different backgrounds. So, you think Yellen, when she was the Fed chair, liberal because she's a labor economist. That was her history. Chair Powell was kind of an outsider. And that, I think, in part, what made him appealing to Trump way back in 2018 was that he was an outsider. This is a guy who originally was a lawyer, then went into, I believe it was private equity, right, and private banking, and then found his way after that into public servant treasury roles. And his background, I think he's from D.C. I think it was like private school educated and all that. So definitely an insider in some regards, but also someone who, in his words, has been very measured and upfront and honest in what they said they were going to do and why they were doing it. I mean, he's getting all sorts of criticism, and the Federal Reserve, deservedly or not, about being too late to cut rates or being too late to raise rates, right, coming out of the pandemic. But look, the Federal Reserve, and this has been around for a while, they put a little bit more weight on that employment piece. Okay, so what's that mean? The Federal Reserve, it seems that they will tolerate a little bit higher inflation if it means maximum employment. Okay, so when they were coming out of the pandemic, the Fed, instead of raising rates, they wanted to make damn sure that the pandemic was over and that they were achieving nearly full employment before they started raising rates. And that's what they did.
So when folks give them and Biden a lot of credit for the so-called soft landing, in a lot of ways, you could say that's because the Fed decided to make sure that employment was on sound footing before they risked creating inflation by raising rates, because that's a cost that's a little easier for everybody to bear when all they've got to do is tighten their belts as opposed to having to come up with money when they have no income whatsoever. Is that a kind of a fair read on it?
Yeah, I'm the only piece I would disagree with you on is I don't know that I would give Joe Biden credit for the soft landing. I think much of that was the decisions by the Federal Reserve in the face of the congressionally approved and signed into law by Biden spending that came out of the pandemic, including what was signed into law by Trump, which we addressed in our deficits episode.
So I don't know if you know the answer to this. I wish I did. Do we know how Powell became Trump's guy in the first place?
I don't know.
This does not sound like somebody that Trump would like.
Know. I think, look, he was an outsider, okay? I think he might have been sellable to the right people at the right time. I remember when he was being nominated, he was popular. He got through the Senate Banking Committee. The only dissent in the Senate Banking Committee was Elizabeth Warren, which, just to touch on it, like, oh, now it's Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump that don't like Jay Powell. Well, that's no surprise because both of them are populists, right? They're both pushing for these populist policies, cut rates for the so-called little man, right? Damn everything else. Damn any inflation effects, damn any unemployment effects, have low rates for the sake of low rates. But I don't know. I don't know how he found his way specifically there.
It's funny. I was digging into his full Senate votes, and if you look at the split, it's very partisan. You have Cruz, Paul, Rubio, and Lee voting against him every time for the Republicans. Some of those are populists. Some of those are OG libertarians. You have Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, of course, the anti-banking senators. But a lot of pro-business Democrats voted against him when he was Trump's guy and voted for him when he was Biden's guy, and vice versa. Funnily enough, the only Democrat who voted for him the first time and then against him the second time was the disgraced Bob Menendez. One I thought was really interesting, though. You know who did vote against him in 2018? Kamala Harris. So If Trump didn't want him to become Fed chair, or didn't want him to be Fed chair much longer, maybe he should have voted for Kamala Harris for president.
And isn't that the crux of the issue? Isn't that why central bank independence is key? So that the central bank isn't succumbing to the political winds of the given day.
Yes, absolutely. And especially if they have that mandate that you described.
And that's it. They don't have anything else. That's the mandate. That's it. There's nothing else. They got some responsibilities, oversight of banks, helping community banks, this and that, research. But look, they have a simple mandate, simple goal: full employment, stable prices.
And I think once again, we're just learning this lesson over and over again. Whether you want to call them neolibs, whether you want to call them moderates, what people like Bill Clinton were offering the American people, first and foremost, what we're losing now in this age of Trump is stability, is the ability to decide that you want to invest in a degree, invest in a business, invest in yourself, and have that investment pay off over time, because you know that university is still going to be there. You know that industry is still going to be there. You know that somebody isn't going to sweep in with a completely erratic, potentially even corrupt policy to pick winners and losers and completely destroy your 15-year plan with the stroke of a pen.
You don't want to rock the boat so much that people start falling off, right?
Well, then it bears the question, why is Trump rocking the boat? What is Trump trying to achieve by going up against Powell?
Let me be as charitable as I can. He's going up against Powell because that's the head of the Fed, and he wants the Fed to cut interest rates in advance of potential negative economic effects stemming from the tariffs. And it appears that we are in a hot trade war with the Chinese, who are our largest trading partner. And he's looking for all hands on deck of screw your mandate. This is for the survival of our country. Cut rates so that we can better deal with this Chinese threat, this existential Chinese threat, that we have. If I'm not being as charitable, to me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The Federal Reserve's I said the Federal Reserve they over communicate, right? They're so transparent. Their obvious slant right now is to cut rates. In fact, they were cutting going into, fall 2024. So in September of last year, they had it at 5.25 to 5.5. Then they cut in September, right? Inflation's coming down. We're trying to balance full employment with stable prices. They cut rates 4.75 to 5. Then in November, just in advance of the election, whatever that was, November 7th, 8th, 9th, they cut again. They cut from 4.50 to 4.75. That's the range. Then in December of this past year, they cut again down to 4.25 to 4.5, right? So you take the median there is 4.33. They would like to cut more. My personal belief is that they would have cut probably in March had all this trade war stuff not heated up. They're communicating to us that their posture, that their tendency at this point in time is to cut. And yet he's throwing stuff out there with the tariffs that would, on balance, apparently raise prices, put pressure on prices. At the same time, the Fed's lowering rates. So if the Fed were to lower rates further into this, you would likely put more pressure on inflation, right? Because you're reducing rates, you're trying to stimulate more economic activity. If you try to stimulate more economic activity, again, it's the same amount of dollars chasing too few goods. So they're kind of just going to sit and watch. They're going to wait to see what happens with the tariffs, probably now for another month, 2 months. Like I'd said in the previous episode we discussed, I think it was like 30 to 90 days before we started feeling the effects. They're going to be close to looking at their data across each of the regional Federal Reserve branches, right? And we're in this wait and see approach.
I don't have to be charitable to Trump to want interest rates to be low, right? It's good for anybody trying to buy a house, anybody who owns a house, anybody trying to start a business. So why do I, as the little guy, want the Fed to stand up to Trump and not just cut rates?
Look, from my perspective, and I'm not a central banker, okay? But from my perspective, the rates are probably a little bit too high. The effective funds rate is probably a little too high for what it is, okay? Should it be 0? No. It's at 4 1/3 right now is the median, right? Should it be at maybe 3 1/3? Maybe. But my point is it's not 0. And the reason why you can't just cut and have low rates is because you will hurt your own economy by doing so, by way of impacting negatively your currency. You'll weaken the currency. What would happen is your currency devalues and you find it very hard to buy anything.
So basically, the interest rate being at the right place relative to the rest of the world economy is what guarantees that we have not only stability, but also that the prices are in control here at home.
Correct. Again, they're pursuing the dual mandate, and they typically effectuate that through their interest rate policy.
So I think what it comes down to now is which one of them is going to win this fight. And what's fascinating to me is how Trump phrased his Truth Social post, calling Powell out. Just that last sentence. Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. As far as I'm concerned, this is a textbook classic obfuscation, controversy, free-for-all that Trump loves to throw out there because he's saying two different things with the exact same sentence. He is saying that it cannot come fast enough, acknowledging the fact that he can't fire him. He has to wait out his term and then nominate somebody else. But he uses the word termination, which does imply that he is going to fire him and set up a constitutional crisis to have his way over the interest rate. To me, it's a classic example of what does Trump believe? How can we read into it to understand which one of those two modes Trump fully believes in? The answer is obviously neither. He wants to say the most controversial thing he can while maintaining maximum plausible deniability. It is textbook. It certainly seems right now to both of us that Trump, at the end of the day, backed down to the markets, especially the bond markets, when it came to the Liberation Day tariffs.
Yeah, they had no choice. They were being utterly embarrassed on the global stage. People were selling off, again, everything denominated in dollars.
So is this fight already over? If Powell has the confidence of the U.S. in international markets, is there any chance that Trump can actually take him down?
I don't know. I agree with you that the post he had there about the termination, like that's just media fodder for the story of the day. I mean, forget the legal stuff, okay, of whether he can or can't. Legally, it doesn't appear that he can, but it seems like what is legal under this administration, I'll just leave it at it depends. I am more comfortable saying if they really tried to fire the Federal Reserve Chairman and move forward with that ideal, the market would get ahead of that. And what you saw in the short time period that the tariffs were in place would be small in magnitude to the pushback you would see, because you would be unilaterally removing independence from the Federal Reserve of the largest Federal Reserve Bank in the world that has the global reserve currency. At that point, you're just like any other central bank. And we've seen outside of the United States, several countries who over the last 10 or 15 years have eroded or completely revoked central bank independence in their countries. And those countries' currencies haven't done great. And I encourage, go look them up. Look at the Turkish lira to the United States dollar since like 2010. Look at the Indian rupee, right? Modi took away central bank independence there. Look at the Argentinian peso, right? And there was the lack of central bank independence there. And now you'll say to me maybe, but those countries are peanuts. They're emerging markets. Okay, sure. That's not the U.S. dollar. No, you know what? You're right. Nothing stands against the U.S. dollar, right? Maybe you should go look at gold versus the U.S. dollar. Gold's at all-time highs versus the U.S. dollar. What's that telling you? The Swiss franc is at the highest levels since the 2011 European debt crisis and threat of double-dip U.S. recession. So if there's two currencies, or let's say a currencies by way of mind, that can stand up to the dollar, it's the Swiss franc and gold. And you're seeing both of those strengthen versus the dollar. And if you follow this stuff, that should be of concern to you. Now, the US dollar is not in any risk of imminent collapse here, okay? But if you were to go and try to chase out the Federal Reserve Chairman, that reaction is going to be incredibly poor. Incredibly poor.
Well, I think legally, like you said, this should be airtight, and that should make it politically airtight. But unfortunately, we've seen that fail over and over again. What we haven't seen fail when it comes to keeping Trump honest, keeping Trump accountable, keeping Trump within some semblance of rational policy has been the markets. So to hear that they have Powell's back to a far greater extent than they do a free world economy is certainly saying something. Whatever
you in your mind think Wall Street is, I think trying to chase out the Federal Reserve Chair, and I'm saying the position, it's not about Powell. It's the role of the chair and Federal Reserve independence. I think that's the red line that he would lose all support with those people. From my perspective, and remember, I'm coming from this as a banking, economic, finance perspective, this would be one of the wildest things. And I think it would be for such a little payoff. I mean, Powell's gone next year. His term's up in 2026. If Trump thinks that what he's doing is so bad, he needs a lackey that'll do whatever these central bankers in these emerging markets presidents of those countries will do for them, then he must not have that much faith in his own policy, does he? I mean, it's like a year left in Powell's term with a Senate that's favorable to him. So it doesn't seem that the payoff for this would really make sense, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that politically?
The fact that he's willing to go to war with the business community.
This isn't business. This is capital. This is the capital class. These are not the same stratospheres. I get what you're saying, but I want to put a point on it. This is the capital class. This is the institutional money that has the ability to access things no one else does. And they said when the tariffs went in effect, we're taking our ball, we're going home, we're out. Do you think if he comes out and says, Powell, you're fired, you're gone, not saying if that's legal or not, whatever, does the Secretary of Treasury, does Bissent resign?
Whether Bissent resigns or not is more of a personal question than a political one. Trump doesn't do the traditional scapegoat thing where he picks one person to shoulder all of the blame for a scandal and then casts them out in disgrace. That would be admitting fault, and Trump doesn't admit fault. That's his superpower. That's why he never has to face the consequences of anything ever. But I think there's something almost poetic about you as a banker telling me that the capital class, as you call it, are finally the ones who are going to stand up for reason and cast Trump down. Because we've just heard so many people make that same argument for so many institutions over the years. I've believed a lot of them. I've made a lot of them. But from Republicans to the national electorate to the courts to the federal government to evangelicals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there have been so many times when he's done something heinous. We've all risen up against him to condemn him, and he's lived to fight another day. So I do think it's an open question whether this capital class is going to stand up to Trump or whether they're just going to roll over like all these law firms are, like all these colleges are.
I think you may be right. And I'd say where you said these other people or institutions kind of rolled over, the market certainly did. Market certainly stood up to him. And I, frankly embarrassed them. I'd be embarrassed if my plans were so shunned by the entire world, including at home, that 13 hours after I put them into effect, I had to rescind them.
Bill, I need to stop you right there because that is a feeling, a sentiment that I have been in very often for the last 10 years. When I've finally seen the media stand up to him and land a blow. When I've finally seen John McCain stand up to him and land a blow. When we finally saw Mitch McConnell stand up to him after January 6th and land a blow. When we finally saw all of these various institutions finally find their backbone, finally stand up for him, finally get a win. We should all be embarrassed if we ever took an L that bad. And what does he do? He grimaces, he grits his teeth, and he gets up to be a disgrace for another day. So this fight is long form over. We in the Democratic Party, moderate Republicans, the media, all these other institutions, they had days where they felt that same confidence that you felt, like the system is finally kicking in and reason is finally being restored. And I certainly want to believe that the masters of commerce, the masters of capital, are the ones who truly have nothing to lose by standing up to this guy and only everything to gain by maintaining economic stability and economic order. But when so many of those guys were at his inauguration, seemed to be in on it, when there are all of these accusations of insider trading and that all these folks got the tip off about the tariffs, however long it was beforehand, I don't know that you should be feeling that confident that the markets really did stand up to him. I think, unfortunately, they won the day, and who wins the war is left to be seen.
Sure. I mean, that's possible too. But what would you say about the approval ratings that he's getting? To give you some context, first 100 days. Okay. So we're at like day, I don't know what it is. Let's say 80. So the YouGov and The Economist did a poll. President's handling of the economy. Trump's first term, at this time into the term, he was like net +3. Biden was like net +6. Trump is net -8. Net approval rating, the total, right? Not just economy. Trump won at this time was like -15. He's now -18. Biden was like a +10, and Obama was close to a +20. So it would appear to me that beyond the market, he's even losing support among even his core constituency, no?
If I had a fast forward button that I could press to bring us to Election Day 2026, I would. I'm starting to feel very optimistic about that day if we can hang in there.
Oh, come on. Don't be so negative. Worse things have happened.
People are getting disappeared off the streets. I think, unfortunately, we should not take it for granted that there will be free and fair elections in 2026, although I do expect there to be today, but I'm not taking it for granted. That's all I'm saying. Do I want to hit a fast forward button and get to the midterm elections the way that things are looking right now? Absolutely. But I think it's telling that you, the economist, are telling me, don't worry, the system's got this, and let me prove my point by reading you a bunch of polls.
No. I hear what you're saying. I'm not going that far. I agree with you on your point about on that day the market won, and you go back to your corners and you fight another day. I agree with that. I also believe that in the immediate term, or at least in the intermediate term, the results of the Liberation Day and all that kind of put a maximum or a ceiling for a point in time on how crazy this can get economically. The other stuff I can't comment on, right? You're talking about people disappearing. What do you want me to say? I can't comment on that stuff. But speaking only about the money aspects of it, it seems like the reaction to that put a ceiling on how crazy things can get in the near term.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. Trump's handling of the economy is so poor that democracy is back on, folks. I really hope so. And again, I feel like there's a lot of damage that's going to be done, and we have a lot of hanging in there to do. But right now, I have to believe that we're going to right the ship in the midterms if this continues, if something doesn't break before then.
The trend isn't good. If you're going to ask me, is Trump bad for the economy? The trend is not looking good right now.
Usually, I try to end on a slightly positive note, on a slightly personal note. Banker Bill, do you have a favorite Fed chair?
Oh, favorite Fed chair? It's gotta be Volcker, right? The guy that looked inflation in the eye and killed it. The guy who was summoned into the White House, into the Oval Office in 1984, and was told by, who was it? I think it was Reagan's chief of staff, with Reagan sitting right there silent. Don't you dare raise interest rates into the 1984 election. And Volcker got up and walked out. That's my favorite. And you made me think of something. This stuff's not new. Trump, this isn't nuanced. There's been presidents who have wanted to fire the Federal Reserve chairman before, and in my opinion, purely political reasons. Harry Truman wanted to fire Eccles, in like 1948 or 49, whatever that was. And then the other instance that I know is with Volcker and Reagan. Reagan wanted to get rid of his ass too, couldn't do it because the market won't support it. So I don't think it's ultimately going to happen here either.
Bill, I just figured out how we're going to survive this recession.
Yes.
Fed Chair collectible NFTs.
I'm out.
Well, thank you for listening to Is It Bad for the Economy? This has been our third public episode. You can listen to the previous 2 episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. If it's not there, let us know. We'll get it there as soon as possible. We appreciate the reviews and the 5 stars so much. So please keep them coming. We've been so grateful for the amazing response that we've gotten so far. And if you want even more Is It Bad for the Economy, head to isitbadfortheeconomy.com and sign up with your email list. We'll give you 2 free pre-preview episodes as well, one on sports gambling and the other on a cryptocurrency reserve. Thank you so much for listening to Is It Bad for the Economy? And we hope that next time we'll have something to talk about that's not bad for the economy. But if we do, Banker Bill will be right there calling BS every step of the way.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like